However, it's in your best intention to also take notes, because if you've ever had one of my computer graphics classes, sometimes the mic isn't working, sometimes it didn't record. So don't use it as a failsafe or an opportunity to take a nap. More actually engage with what's being said. And nicely enough, we have screens on both sides, and they're all right. They're definitely better than the VGA projectors that we had a long time ago. However, first things first, if you want to find the page and where to go, essentially my page is Crabapple Designs, or if you type in Chris V. Peace, you can definitely find it. Yes, we have a San Antonio College, what's the word, trailer? They made me make a promotional video for San Antonio College one time for free, but that's a different story. But yeah, if you want to find any of the videos that we're going to record, or even honestly the past videos, because let's face it, I do this for all of my classes that involve the computer, they're all there, right? So even the ones in computer graphics, now they're not going to get you any credit, but they'll definitely help with Revit or Rhino, or you know, essentially when we start getting into the modeling stuff. I mean, don't get me wrong, I'm not a YouTuber and I don't do this for any monetary gain. So to be honest, there's a lot more videos out there that are way better than mine, right? However, if my videos help you get started, that's fine too, right? That, and it's usually a pretty good resource for students so that they can pause and go, what did he say, or what did he click on? Just because I do go pretty fast. It's also another good excuse for me to go, well, I already went over that in the video. I don't have to say it to you again, right? So do be aware of that. It saves us both time. However, I'll still answer your questions. But yes, Chris V. Peace or Crabapple Designs. Yep, that's my company. Anyway, the next thing that you want to take a look at is, of course, on ACES. And you'll see that under our next exercise, which is exercise 5, titled Rhino and Illustrator, there's a couple more links here. Obviously the one that I gave you guys, which is of course the PDF, which is entitled Rhino and Illustrator Tracing. There's also a template file so that you can get started, right? And I also have it in a Google Drive link, right? So just in case that link isn't working for you, the file is actually right there as well. Awesome videos, one for Illustrator, one for Rhino, and another one for Rhino and just generally architecture. Again, just sort of videos to get you started, just in case you are just absolutely lost. Is this anybody's first time with Rhino and Illustrator, actually? Yeah, so it's going to be a large majority of us, and for good reason, right? If you actually like this stuff and you really feel gravitated towards it, you're really going to enjoy architecture. Like I was telling you, especially when you transfer to UTSA or Texas Tech or U of H, there is no more analog drafting drawings, right? In fact, mine was ripped off the wall to make a statement. And it's very true that we use really all digital lines. Now, what's really important and where SAC students definitely stand out is their line weights, right? And their ability to actually look at the lines for what they are and what they produce, how they communicate. Don't get me wrong, it's always really enticing seeing, even the pinups right outside of our hallway, right? They look very finished, they look very done. And the digital realm inherently has this feeling to it: perfection, accuracy, right? However, most of the time in schematic design or freehand architecture, what is it supposed to be? Referential. Usually not exactly accurate. In fact, too accurate makes it look like it's almost finished or complete, which is a very hard thing to escape from in the digital realm. But just like Toy Story 4 looks a lot better than Toy Story 1, is because of the detail that is in Toy Story 4. It's the dirt, it's the bumps, the mesh, the way the polylines are actually moving a little bit more organically. If you look at Toy Story 1, it is freaking laughable. The dog's legs aren't even connected to the dog, right? It's hilarious what they were achieving in 1995. Yeah, literally 1995. I was 5 years old. Some of you maybe not even born yet, but computers have definitely come a long way, and I definitely enjoy them and appreciate them, because when I was at SAC, like I was telling you guys before, I didn't know a lick of the computer. In fact, you would see Chris Barrett and you'd be like, that is not a computer guy, right? Now I'm definitely absolute 180, and it's of course incorporated into both of my practices. Anyway, so just in case you need to find those files, they're located here in Canvas, and of course under, basic Rhino command template. So according to our assignment, and this is actually what you'll open up, I want to go over the interface a little bit, right? Don't get me wrong, I know a lot of us, this is probably, you already know this program maybe like the back of your hand, especially if you've already taken computer graphics or taking it right now. You're probably getting very familiar with the UI or the user interface of the program. And let's face it, there's a lot of stuff, especially in Rhino 8. But at least for this next 4.5 weeks, we're not going to dive into the really advanced stuff. Really, I just want to give you another tool on your tool belt that is exactly like your drafting table. In fact, for some of us, you don't even have to model. I won't even give that option until actually the observation tower. For this next exercise, you're drawing only 2D. Do not make a three-dimensional object unless you know how to make an axon in Grasshopper. And if you do, then we'll be looking for it. But there are some requirements that we need for this drawing. Keep in mind that, yes, what I gave you are all isometrics. They're all 30/30s, right? We're gonna need plan obliques. So just like the previous assignment, we need to shape these into a perfect 90-degree angles. That is actually a lot easier to do just by hand. And the reason I want you to do it by drafting is because, let's face it, you're probably not gonna ever draft again, but it's not gonna be the last time you ever draw something technically, right? And to be completely honest with you, if you've ever used AutoCAD, this program's amazing, right? Because it works just like AutoCAD, arguably way better. And in fact, came before AutoCAD. Originally, it was invented in 1988 and was made for jewelry design, right? So that they could use 3D printers. Yes, 3D printers have existed since 1956, yet not commercially for obviously a while. Anyway, just to explain some of the stuff, I've separated the file into actually 2-dimensional commands and 3-dimensional commands. Obviously, you won't use the 3-dimensional commands until maybe a little bit later, so we won't go over those today, but we'll naturally kind of go over these. And just to explain it, obviously, this is step 1, and step 2 is kind of your final result. So if you select both of these, I type in trim, enter, and I select obviously the ones that I don't want, it's going to trim them off accordingly. Now if I press enter and exit, then it stays as such. The best command of all is of course Command Z or Control Z if you're on Windows, and that is the undo button, pretty universal for just about every program. So really the first part of this assignment is selecting obviously 3 of these, and we can tell from the instructions that they need to be on 11/17. Well, I don't know about you, but I kind of like to get an idea of the paper, right? What's the first thing that you do in the real world? You get the piece of paper, right? We don't draw in nowhere land, so let's go ahead and make that piece of paper. However, before we do, let's go over some of the tools. By default, mine's probably going to look a little different than yours. Not only is it on the Mac side, right? So if you have a Mac, of course, it'll look a lot like mine. On the Windows, it'll look a little bit different. However, it's all the exact same tools and all the exact same commands. So that's pretty nice. Didn't used to be that way. It was kind of weird. The Mac side was called Rhino Work in Progress, and it was very disalarming. Anyway, and it didn't do all the things that Windows did. However, now it does. Anyway, one of my favorite layers, no pun intended, is the layers panel, right? Which is actually kind of looks like this little piece of pie. Pretty nice. I can right click, new layer. I can call it paper space, and just about anything. The reason I say this is probably my favorite tool is because it'll help you immensely in Illustrator. In fact, it's really just a good habit to always be organized in the digital realm. Let's face it, it's really easy to misalign or quite literally lose stuff, right? Or accidentally delete it, or what have you, accidentally move something that you don't necessarily want to move. It's also a really great way to have options and change the color, change the line types, change the print color, and so on, right? Obviously there's an infinite amount of options, and we can only cover really a small fraction of this program. However, it should be a good basis and definitely get you started way better than me learning by myself on YouTube in 2 weeks, right? So definitely a better stab at it. So first thing we want to do is actually make some paper space. I'm going to change the color of my paper space just to show you, so we can double click on that color. I want to choose a color that is actually able, that you guys can probably see on the projector well. So I'm going to go with red, and that'll be fine. I'm going to hit rectangle, or just type in rectangle. Usually for me it's REC. I'm going to hit enter. First thing it's going to ask me is, well, where do you want it? In fact, if you take a look at your command bar, and on the Windows of course it'll be at the bottom or at the top, right? On the Mac it's on our top left hand side. But once you hit rectangle and you hit enter, we can basically tell the computer, well, okay, where do you want it? Don't get me wrong, we could basically just click anywhere, or I can do it by coordinates. So I could do 0, 0, 0, which would be the x-axis, y-axis, and the z-axis. Right? If that sounds really confusing, you can also just click, right? Not a big deal. Just trying to be fancy. What's nice about this is I can type in 17 inches. Remember, it needs to be the actual inch symbol, not just 2 foot symbols, right? Be very careful, it'll just say syntax error. I'll hit enter, and as you can see, it's probably one of the smallest 11 by 17s you've ever seen. So I'll do 11 inches. Oh, in my case I accidentally did 11 feet. And as you can see, that is not 11 by 17 box that I wanted. Let's try again. Rectangle, I can click anywhere. 17 inches, enter. 11 inches, enter. And voila, we have our 11 by 17 piece of paper. And what's nice is, well, it's actually true scale, right? Don't get me wrong, these are actually ginormous and probably the size of our building. Not exactly important. However, what's nice is, well, now we have our paper. And if I happen to change, actually, I just realized I didn't do it on the right layer. And that's okay, because now I get to show you how to change it. I'll select the item, I'll right click on the layer, and go to change object layer. Now don't get me wrong, it's not going to change anything because, well, it went from red to red. However, now if I change this to blue or any other color, let's say, yeah, let's go with blue. Of course it'll change that layer to blue, right? So we got our paper space, and I know that I need 3 of them, so I'm going to type in copy, enter. I'm going to basically click anywhere. It's basically asking me points to copy from, and really I can click anywhere. I can hold shift if I want to make it straight, and of course continue my paper spaces. Now obviously I wouldn't want to make a title block over and over again, so there's a couple things I could do. One of those that I gave you is called offset. Right, so as you can see, the way offset works is you take the number of inches and you can of course offset the entire line. Now I know that's probably not new for everybody, but it is a pretty useful tool. Now in my case, that way I don't have to keep going back and forth between how big and small these are. I'm just going to make these a little bit smaller and move them a little bit closer to my page. By default, you probably don't have this green, red, and blue. This is what's called gumball, and usually actually located at the bottom of our screen. Why is it called gumball? I have no idea, but it's terribly adorable, right? What it does though is, obviously when it's not enacted, if I click on something, I can't really rotate it or move it really easily. I mean, don't get me wrong, I could type in move and move it, right? But with the gumball tool, and I don't even have to select anything, if I just click gumball and select anything, it's going to give me a couple of options. I can move it really easily, or I can even rotate it, hold shift, and it ends up being a very useful tool. So definitely gumball is definitely one to put in the books. The next most useful tool is definitely O-snap, and no, I don't mean out of excitement, but it is literally called O-snap because it enacts some certain variables of geometry found in this digital realm. In my case, I like to always use end, mid, intersection, and usually your perpendicular lines. We'll see those come up a little bit as we draw this a little bit more. So first things first, and I'm just going to go ahead and draw one of these for today. We'll go ahead and do the first one. That way it's a little bit easier. It's our very familiar shape, and even though this isn't an isometric drawing, we want to draw it in a plane oblique. First things first, well, what kind of lines would I make in a drawing? I'd probably have a construction lines, right? So I'm going to just abbreviate it that, construction lines. I'm going to go with, and it doesn't really matter what the color is here. Obviously, these are kind of just placeholders. They're not really like final colors in any way. I'll probably want a large line weight layer. So I'll go with large line. And you can define these however you like. Medium line. But the most important thing is to, of course, make sure every single line has a particular layer. This is actually so that you can spend 30 seconds in Illustrator rather than 30 minutes. This starts to become really important when you have a very complex drawing. Simply, you can click on layers and change their line types, rather than individually picking on certain lines just to change them, which can take forever. Obviously, I'm going to give a pretty good demonstration of that as well. Anyway, so we have our paper space, we've created some lines. We can double click on them so that we can differentiate between their colors. Usually I just pick colors at random. For the sake of today, I really just pick colors that you guys can probably see on the screen. So hopefully I'm picking some good ones, because not every projector likes to show all these colors. So that should be fair. We'll go with a light line for that one. Go ahead and rename it, and we'll call it light lines. Well, hopefully you can kind of see the potential of this. I can really be organized, right? There's no question which one's going to be my large line weight versus my medium line weights versus my construction lines, and so on. Now, just like a regular drafting project, I'm going to click on my construction line so I can double click, and you'll see that a check mark enables the layer. Now, I'm pretty sure that happens on Windows, but don't quote me on it. I think it actually turns into a circle. Again, I'm not sure what the differences between Mac and Windows always are, but I try and be consistent to help. So let's go ahead and start drawing the object. Now, don't get me wrong, there's a lot of tools. For today's assignment, you really just need lines. I mean, we're not doing any fancy curves, or really, we're just drawing lines and rotating them. So shouldn't be too bad. However, it is my construction line, so I'm going to do a couple things so I can find the midpoint. I mentioned I can get the offset, so offset. Let's say I want an inch offset. I can go ahead and do that. Again, just construction lines, and so that I can kind of figure out where things are. If I wanted to keep those in place, I could even highlight them all and type in lock. And what's kind of nice is, well, I can't accidentally move them or anything like that. If I want to unlock it, it is going to unlock everything that I did lock. So I'll type in unlock, enter, and you'll see it go back to normal. Another way that I can do this is simply locking the layer itself. However, if you lock the layer itself, you can't actually draw with it anymore. I don't know. I didn't make this program. It's just kind of the way the rules of the program go. But the reason I offset that line was so that I can explode it. I think that's pretty self-explanatory. When you explode a rectangle, it turns into its simplest form. So, of course, 4 separate line segments. For the most part, I like this program because it's pretty intuitive. Explode kind of does what exploding does. Joining does what kind of joining does. And so on and so forth. Now, for the next one, since I'm making a title block, maybe I don't want all the lines of my title block. Very familiar to me. I'm going to go ahead and extend the lines. I know. Again, really intuitive. I'm going to click on the portion that I want to extend, and thank goodness you can see that on this screen. It's kind of hard to see on my screen, but it looks pretty good up here. So, not too bad. You can kind of see what extend does. Another thing to be said is, well, I don't have to do that over and over and over again. In fact, I could take a copy. Well, let's actually finish my title block maybe. I'm going to go ahead and type in text. I know, again, intuitiveness. I probably want a layer for my text though. And the reason for that is because Illustrator does funny things with text. So I'm gonna make a text layer. Just so we're, again, staying organized. So I'm gonna type in text, enter. We'll go with Christopher Red. And as you can see, it's ginormous. And that's fine. Again, thank goodness I have Gumball. I can hold shift and make something pretty small pretty quickly. Another way to do this is, of course, double click, and you can change it to the different units. And actually, I think I have you guys in feet, which is not a big deal. Honestly, we could type in units. We could switch it to inches. More than likely, obviously, when we draw on a drafting table, you want it to be in inches, right? I mean, because, well, that's the units that you're working with. However, honestly, that depends a lot on the machine that you want to work with. If you're 3D printing or laser cutting, you want to work in millimeters and so on and so forth. It gets tricky, but not really the conversation of today. I'll go ahead and hit apply. That way we can be consistent with things. And I do want to make sure that I didn't accidentally change the dimension, so I've got 0.12 of an inch. That can't be right. Let's double check that real quick. Not a big deal. I'll keep it in feet for now just because, well, what I typed was already there. And it still is technically 11 by 17. Yeah, 1.42 feet. It's kind of a weird way to put it. So I'm going to type in units again and make sure that it's actually in a fractional state or feet and inches, because that might just be better. Obviously, it's not going to change my dimension until I change it again. It's more like an object. Or it'll just stay in decimal form. Usually you can go to dimension style, but I'm not exactly, worried about it. Really trying to show more than we really need. But again, actually probably the moral of the story is to, of course, always do your units first. That way you can stick to inches or feet. Just keep in mind that the file is in feet by default. So first things first, type in units and switch it to inches. Again, not exactly a big deal as long as you're typing in the right units when you make stuff. Let's continue though and get the rest of my title block. That way I can copy it 3 times. That way instead of doing it 3 times, I just copy it 3 times. Now again, in my case, I could click on this and actually find the decimal place for feet. However, clearly inch decimal would probably be better, even though it did switch to feet. Again, moral of the story, definitely switch your units first. Not that it's a big deal, but it will save you some time. That's looking pretty good. Of course, I can make a copy and complete my title block. I could always just double click on the piece itself and of course change the words. So maybe this is an exercise. In my case, 05 and so on. Oh, didn't delete Christopher Red, I guess. But not bad. Now the reason I did all that, at least for one of them, was so that I could easily copy. I can select a point that's familiar to each one, such as this corner. And thanks to my OSnap tool and my End tool being enabled, it just magically kind of snaps to that point. You can see that it even makes a white little sort of star mark for you to kind of enable that. In fact, to the left, it'll even say that it's an end and an intersection. So again, a very intuitive program. But now we got 3, and like I said, I do want to draw one today. So let's go ahead and do so. I'm going to start with my construction line layer. Those are, I guess, my construction lines. So I'm going to go with my large line. And since it's orange, now it doesn't really matter where I draw it. Again, I kind of want to make this as easy as possible. So I'm going to go ahead and lock those just so I can see it better and start drawing. After all, I mean, that is the center of my page, which is really all I needed it for. So let's go ahead and draw this by the inch itself. So again, I'll just type it in inches. In my case, I'm just going to type in line, enter, right? Click anywhere on the page. You'll see that if you hold shift, it's going to naturally follow the 90-degree angles, but it's not exactly going to follow a 45 yet, right? I'm going to want to draw those pieces. So in my case, 1 inch, enter, and then choose the angle, and that is where I could choose 45 and so on. So again, there's my first piece. Orange is not an easy color to see. Let's change that. I think red is the winner today. Not bad. But we've got our color red, and we just need to draw the rest of it. So in our case, 1, 2, 3, 4 spaces means 4 inches. So again, I'll draw another line. I'll hit it to my endpoint. How easy is that? 4 inches, enter. Obviously a much different way of drawing, right? It's a little bit more accurate, and let's face it, I don't need a scale. I don't need to line up a little scale or anything like those things. I simply draw the line and then rotate it. I can type in rotate, so RO. I can even take that piece and I could type in 45 degrees, right? Now obviously it's going to stick to a coordinal plane, so in my case I could say oops, or I could mirror it since I know some of the laws of geometry. If I mirror it, then of course that's actually correct. Next line that I need, and maybe these ones are starting to get in the way, obviously for their angle differences, so I'm going to unlock it and probably just get rid of them. I mean, I'm not going to print them, so in my case I guess I don't need them. Let's go ahead and make another line and type in line. The next line that goes up is 1, 2, 3 inches, so I'll type in 3 inches, enter. I'll hold shift so that it stays straight, and essentially what it's doing here is it's going, that color part is the 3 inches, and then it's kind of just showing you, hey, you're going past 3 inches. So I mean, don't get me wrong, it's just trying to help you out. So in my case, I'm just drawing the outside of the entire volume. That way I can make sure that I got everything. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Sweet. We'll go 6 inches. So again, I'll type in line, enter. Type in 6 inches, enter. And as you can see, it creates a 6-inch line. I'll go ahead and rotate it. So I'll click my center point, the angle at which I want to go, and in my case, 45 degrees. Okay, now it's starting to look like a plane oblique. However, why would I draw these lines again and rotate them when I can just simply copy them? And start to see if it fits on the page or not. Not quite. But it does seem like we still have this L shape. So again, understanding geometry, I could really start to take the exact same lines and use them. I mean, why work harder when I can work smarter? And obviously probably the best part of this program is realizing, wow, I can still move the entire thing if it doesn't fit, or what have you. However, that does kind of stink. Maybe we'll actually end up making our title block a little bit smaller. Maybe it's more like a half-page thing and we kind of let it fall off. Not sure. It's so weird that they fit one year and then they don't fit the next. Not a big deal though. Again, I'm just going to take those lines because, well, I can always trim them and just do about anything that I need to. In my case on this one, I'm going to copy. I'm going to go, in my case it's only 1 inch thick, so I'm going to go with 1 inch. Now in my case I need to make it actually 1 inch to the side. Oh, good thing there's actually this perpendicular, right? Again, the computer program is constantly trying to help you. If I did 1 inch this way, it would technically be incorrect, right? It would be too thick. However, if I just make it perpendicular to the line of which it was, now it is correct, right? And obviously that's the part that is going to be 1 inch, not 4 feet. So let's keep going. And as you can see, it should hopefully be a little bit easier. Definitely accurate, more accurate to say the least. I can trim it, right, and of course continue as I go. What's even nicer is once I've established some points, it's as simple as connecting them. In my case, it's about a copy and paste job. And of course drawing my lines. Going for more like a wireframe mode. After all, I don't know what eventually I want to have hidden, or maybe there's some kind of special elements that I want to take upon, especially once I get it towards Illustrator. I guess I didn't really have to draw that line, but we did, so. Looks like we need the midpoint of this portion, right? Or we could start to go, well, maybe that's 1.5, and maybe we get a piece of that. Obviously, I think it's 2 inches, 2 inches, 2 inches. That would explain it and make sense that it's in perfect thirds. So I'm going to go ahead and draw another line. There is a default line button. One of my favorite things is just to type line. We got our 2 inches. What's nice is we'll find that the point is in there, and of course is helping us out again. I could use mirror, so I'm going to type in mirror again. I'm going to find the midpoint of my line and find the other midpoint. Just again, understanding geometry goes a long way here. So we'll take that line just because we know it goes down 1 inch. So why draw an inch again when I can just copy it? And honestly, if I didn't talk so much, I could probably even finish it faster. Or do make sure that you actually get it on the line, right? Which is a terrible reason why you should ever have near, N-E-A-R, ever on. It's very sparingly used because that stuff happens all the time when you have near on, so be very careful. However, again, the computer program's trying to help me here, and not too shabby. Obviously, we can delete the line that we don't need and keep going. If I want to draw multiple lines at a time, I can type in polyline. Yep, stands for multiple lines. So in my case, again, I want to make sure that I actually hit on that piece and make sure that it's saying end right before I click. And as you can see, I think there's a little discrepancy there. There we go. But yeah, we're definitely getting the wireframe, and I think the last part of this bit is, I think, a missing sort of corner piece. So let's go ahead and get that. Even though we won't have that line there, I might use it again. So again, copy. And I can move stuff upon the line as well, so that's kind of nice. So 1 inch, enter. And again, it's finding it for me pretty nicely. Doesn't want to help me there because I guess it's trying to find that intersection. Again, be careful, right? You don't want to accidentally click on something that, well, you're not really trying to get, right? When in doubt, draw a line. 1 inch, enter. And when in doubt, copy a line. Intersection. In my case there, it looks like we just need to copy. And I guess we could draw a line there. Or I could just take one of these. Why not? I'm more of a fan of just trimming it off once I'm finished with it. In my case, TRIM or just TR, and of course trim the pieces that you don't need. In my case, there's actually quite a few here we don't need, so I'll trim. We don't need any of that. Obviously we do need that little line there, and arguably we don't need that line, or technically it would be hidden, but let's leave that for a second. Again, nicely enough, I have a perpendicular, so there you go. We drew the first shape. And the reason I want you to draw it this way, guys, is, again, it's just something that at the end of the day, let's face it, how many of you guys know how to model this thing? Maybe a few of us, right? And don't get me wrong, you might already understand wire cut and viewing it in different forms, and you already know how to chop it up, right? And bit it up. However, that is not the point of our Graphics 2 course. The point of our Graphics 2 course is to make beautiful digital drawings that don't look finished. Even though that sounds like a wild goal, it will be what we're trying to obtain here. We don't want to be computer people. We want to look artistic, right? And actually have some of our artistic styles come about because let's face it, everybody's using the same ink now, everybody's using the same program, everybody's using literally the same shapes. So the chances of them all looking the exact same are very closer, right? At least compared to the analog, where arguably they're completely different and they should never be the exact same. So we need to try to objectively get that same quality about it. However, there's a lot more here that I need, so I'm going to go ahead and select everything, at least in that portion. I'm going to type in trim, enter, and get rid of anything I don't need. In my case, those. And as you can see, it should start to really fill in. Don't get me wrong, some of these lines would actually be really nice to see as sort of like a wireframe or things like that. So maybe I bring them back a little bit. But I definitely want to keep this as maybe my main lines and make sure that the object makes, you know, physical sense. The next thing that I could do here is hatching or poche, what is known as poche. However, if you type in poche, the computer program will probably laugh at you, right? In our case here, I'm going to turn off the paper space. Again, another reason why you would want to have lines is so that you can always turn them off and select things easier as well. So in my case here, I'm going to type in hatch, and I can give this a certain shade, right? More like a fill in the blank scenario, right? But I could start to think about the shade and shadow qualities. I'll hit enter in this case. And there's obviously there's a lot of options I can do here. I can do dots. For our case, let's just go ahead and go with solid. It's something that's a little easier to change, obviously in Illustrator. No, it doesn't have to be red, right? But it is going to stay to the exact same layer that you chose. So if I select these pieces, right, and it wouldn't be a bad idea to have a hatching layer, or even dare I say poche, right click and change object layer, right? In my case, looks like it disappeared because, well, the layer is not enacted, right? So again, very useful tool. Let's maybe get the other side and try something a little bit different. So in my case, again, I'm going to select everything. I'm going to type in hatch. Another thing that you might notice is it must be on boundary mode. However, yeah, it'll be in your options or your properties, which I don't have either of those activated. Not a big deal. Mine's by default is in a boundary mode, so not a big deal. Enter. Let's do something fancy with that one. We'll do hatch lines. We'll make it a scale that is really small, that way we can see it a little bit better. As you can see, we can start to see those lines. Again, what a time saver, right? Now you no longer have to draw all these different little lines. Let's go even smaller. Pretty small. Another thing that's pretty nice about it is usually you can click on it. Maybe not. I was pretty sure you could edit the options. However, you can in Illustrator, but we can change the angle, of course the size and the scale pretty nicely. However, let's change the color for now. We'll still call it poche, but at least it'll change it to something a little bit more black. For the sake of the assignment, this is really all you need to draw, right? However, if you want to take it a step above and beyond, it would be nice to start getting some of the honestly the qualities of drawing that we're most familiar with, which is mistakes, right? So again, another reason why you'd want to draw it in 2 dimensions is so that it can come back and actually change all these lines before I even get into Illustrator, right? So for instance, maybe the shared edge and things like that. Maybe those are certain qualities that I want to have, or maybe I still need to explode some lines, so I can type explode. Some of these you might actually want to break so that you can have a shared line versus the other. Again, just type in break. Literally click on the line and tell it from there to there you want it to break. And those are the nice little anomalies that we're looking for. That's what's going to make a more human-like drawing, is quite literally digital mistakes. Now, you've probably never heard a professor tell you, hey, I want you to add mistakes to your drawing. In fact, most of the time in analog, you're trying to remove mistakes. You're trying to make it more accurate. However, we're going more Toy Story 4 here. I want the lines to be accurate, and they already are. So I have to mess it up a little, but I don't want to mess it up a lot, a little. I don't want to make Woody look like Buzz. That would be ridiculous. Buzz needs to look like Buzz, and Woody needs to look like Woody. However, at least in our architectural drawings, they need to look human, right? Which is arguably, take a stab at it. What do you notice about the human? Well, it makes little mistakes like this. They're a little bit longer sometimes. Seriously. And let's face it, can you even see it? No, right? So again, we're going for the subconscious mind. I guarantee you, your drawings will be the best ones in the room, and they won't even know why until they actually stare at it very closely and realize that there is systematical errors. Again, Toy Story 4. Those are the bumps, the weathering, the things that actually make life is actually imperfection. I had a professor one time told me the only thing that is perfect is imperfection. So let's get the outside lines. So in my case, I'm just holding shift, right? And selecting a multitude of lines, because why would I want to sit there and, do this one at a time? That would be ridiculous. You'll notice that the program itself, if there's a line kind of over another line, it'll go, hey, do you mean the hatch or the curve or the hatch or the curve? Yes, it's called a curve even though it's a straight line. I know that is extremely confusing, and I am still confused to this day why it's called a curve when it's a straight line. But has everything to do with the digital realm and the coding. So in my case, there's my outside edges, right? I can right click on, say, large lines, and it's already in there. So I'm going to go ahead and make a new layer and call it outside edge. Again, in any case that I could be more organized, I'm going to be. And we'll soon find why. So I'll right click and change object layer. And just to make sure that I did change the layer, I'll change it to green. That way I can at least notice that it changed to green. And again, really what you should be drawing in Rhino is actually more of a diagrammatic thing, right? It's both accurate, but it actually is setting up for success in Illustrator. Not only is it completely organized and has layers, but there's certain elements about it that are systematic, right? Such as the different hatches or pochets and things like that. It's looking pretty good though. We got some shared edges, things like that. Just to get fancy with the spices, I'm gonna go ahead and make a middle layer. So stuff that's just kind of closer to the camera, right? And again, the more imperfections, kind of the better sometimes, or at least the more human. So we'll get a good majority of it, and I'll go with my medium line weight. So change object layer. And again, I would do all this before I even got close to Illustrator, right? I definitely want to be done with this entire process. And I forgot to put this actually on the assignment, but the shade and shadow is actually bonus for these objects. Don't get me wrong, they're calculated the exact same way. And for some of you guys, you might be like, wait a minute, this is way easier and I already know what they're doing. In fact, I can just draw lines or make a new layer and call it shade and shadow. I don't want to really go over this part because it'll take a little while, but obviously shadows. We'll double click on that layer and we'll simply just make those lines, right? We all know that it's going to come out there, and we all know that we need a 60-degree angle there. So what do I need to do? Well, let's get a straight one, rotate it, and in our case go negative 60 degrees. So negative 60, sweet. I can take that, trim it, and funny enough, This is what some of you guys kind of did in the physical, right? But now you can do it quite accurately. Right, we can take all of our bottom plane points and arguably even put them where we weren't supposed to. That way we can move them down 1 inch. I'm gonna hold shift, and there's that little shadow that should of course be going all the way out there. Now what's nice is, again, I don't have to do that all over again. And I could even change this all to maybe like a construction layer, right? To be honest with you guys, these drawings should be kick-ass, right? Not only do they show off your skills of what you've learned analog, right? But they should show off actually your line weights. And what I really appreciate about this process is I can change the line weight over and over again. Say I get a very stubborn professor that's like, no, I don't like it this way, I don't like it that way, blah 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 blah, right? I can go in, I can change all the layers. Good thing I have them all layered and organized, because Professor Nick Risen came back and he says, this looks too digital. What do you think I'm gonna do? I'm gonna explode the thing a little bit. I'm gonna maybe even draw on top of it, right? And give it kind of this hybrid sake. I can't tell you how many times that, when I needed to calculate something, I went ahead and made it real quick, printed it out, and then drew what I knew I couldn't model. Because don't get me wrong, I could model a tree, but it's going to take me 4 hours, and sometimes I don't have 4 hours to model a tree in studio. But I do have about 4 seconds, and I can draw a tree in 4 seconds. So you see what I'm saying here? Work with the tools to their best ability. Don't get me wrong, nobody's expecting you to be a grandmaster digital artist, right? Nobody's expecting you to be a grandmaster analog artist, right? But we are expecting you to use the tools when they seem most necessary, right? And to be fair, honestly, architecture is pretty hard in that regard, which is why it's a hard field. We constantly have to use both the science half and the artistic half of our brains. However, this is looking pretty good for the sake of an Illustrator conversation. So let's go ahead and bring some of my other layers back and act as if we were going into Illustrator. So again, this is more like I was finished. I just calculated everything. I've got everything organized, layered, and ready to go. I'm going to select all of my lines. So in my case, the portion that I want to export, I'm going to go to File, Export Selected. And specifically, there's a couple of options that you have. To be fair, there is actually an Adobe Illustrator file. However, it doesn't ever work on my computer, and I'll go ahead and show you. We'll call it the Illustrator test, or test lines, page 1. After all, we do have 3 pages, and I'll need to print all 3 of them. So let's go ahead and save it as an AI file. Should be a piece that comes up, and in fact, it's even going to scale it for us. However, do we have to scale anything here? Why not? Because we already drew it in the exact scale that it was, right? We made an inch, we made 4 inches, 4 inches, and we made that 11 by 17, 11 by 17. Right, so don't get me wrong, if this was any other drawing, and we'll get to that especially when we get to the observation tower on Thursday, we could definitely use this, right? However, for the sake of today, we don't really need it, and we definitely don't want 4 feet to equal an inch yet, right? Because the drawing will get a lot smaller. In my case, since I'm in feet, right, I'll actually want 1 foot to be 1 inch. Again, we're not going to try to talk about scale today, but I'll show you a couple of options there too. However, if the Illustrator export file doesn't work for you like it doesn't work for me for some reason, let's go ahead and make it a DWG. The reason I say DWG is because, well, it'll maintain those layers that become so important in Illustrator. So I'll save it as a DWG. Again, I'll call it really the same thing, but we'll call it test lines DWG. Of course, it'll give some options for us here. Really just picking the Oldest line set is kind of what I like to do. So in my case, 2007 lines would be the best case. Another good one is Cam Imperial. Again, not so much information on that, but let's go with 2007 lines and export. Of course, it'll export all that information. And for the sake of the drawing, we're kind of done with Rhino, right? Not a big deal. So we'll go ahead and go to Illustrator. I should have opened it because it'll take a second. Any questions so far, guys? I just gave you two types, both DWG and AI. You'll highlight everything, file, export selected. So write down, Leo, file, export selected. Good questions though. Any others so far? Fair enough. Help you guys improve, no thanks. So in our case, once Illustrator is open, a couple of things we could do here. We could just start a new file, or since we've already exported those things, we can just open those. For instance, in our case, we could just open up that Illustrator test lines. And this is what I meant by sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. We'll go ahead and press OK. And not a huge deal, but yeah, it's a lot smaller and the page is not the same. Let's go see what the DWG looks like. I mean, don't get me wrong, we could fix that. It's not a big deal. But it's a lot nicer when you can just open something that's ready to go. So let's go with the DWG. And it looks like I accidentally saved as a 3DM file. And it's definitely not going to open up a Rhino file. So not a big deal. I've already have it selected. And for Leo again, we'll do export selected. And we'll make sure that it's a DWG. And yeah, I could have swore, oh, I put it in the wrong spot. That'll do it. Well, no wonder I couldn't find it. Let's go ahead and try and open up that DWG. Open, and there it is. But as you can see on our layers, it's already there and ready to go. We have a scale to fit artboard, or we could do original size. Obviously we can switch it to inches, and we could tell it that 1 foot equals a certain number. And in my case, it's there, but it's really small. Again, this has everything to do with the units and not really a big deal. What we would do here is simply change the paper size first. So I'd go to File, Document Setup, Edit Artboard, and I would change this to 11 by 17, which on the width I'm going to do 17 inches and 11 inches. That's looking more like the ratio we need. And good thing that it actually has a bounding box to what I drew, right? Because I could just hold Shift and of course make it a little bit bigger. I can hold Shift, or sorry, the space key. I can do Command plus sign or Command minus sign to zoom in and zoom out. And I can hold Shift to, of course, keep things proportional as I line up some of the parts of my drawing. However, it should line up exactly to our 11 by 17. And it looks like I have multiple lines in there. Kind of weird. And looks like my text got a little bit bigger too. That's okay. Really just trying to line up that blue box. So, bake it till I make it. And not too shabby. Obviously I don't need all these, so I can quite literally just hide certain layers now. Not sure where I put my text, and there it was. So this is where things get fun. and definitely kind of nice. So don't get me wrong, maybe some of this stuff you accidentally didn't put on a layer, and the way this layer box works, okay, well, first of all, if you've never used Illustrator, welcome, right? It is a complex program that is not very exciting in terms of honestly how to select with it compared to other intuitive programs such as Rhino. Now don't get me wrong, one of my favorite tools is actually right in the top box right here. And make sure that you're on Essentials Classic. The reason, well, click on any one of these and it is not very helpful in terms of drawing things in architecture. However, actually my Illustrator Basics video that I put on my canvas, that is definitely one to watch. It actually comes directly from an architecture student, and she's real poppy with it. She's like, 1% of architects know these secret tricks of Illustrator, and it's a really good one, right? It definitely captures your attention, and there's definitely a lot of useful stuff that you can use with it, and arguably where architecture is going in terms of the digital realm. Anyway, let's take a look at the layers. So as you can see, we'll click on Essentials Classic and you'll get a multitude of things. We can do Command R and we can get a ruler up here. If we right click on that ruler, we can switch it to inches, which is definitely good. Couple of things, we got color guides, we got colors, property bar. The one that I probably use the most is again layers, right, which is of course here. I like to separate it, you know, it's just up to you though. What's nice is that it is separatable, right? I can sort of put it in there, and it sort of has these tabs, if you will, along with the strokes and things like that. No, not the Rock Band, but the strokes. Anyway, no pun intended. So let's take a look at these, and like I said, we don't have to actually go in here and select one thing at a time. That would be ridiculous, and let's face it, we drew a lot of lines. That would be insane, especially in some cases where we have thousands of lines, right? So of course you should be extremely organized and even have more layers than this. What's nice though is I can turn them all on and I can turn them all off in seconds. I really wish Rhino would get on board on that one, because it is extremely useful. You'll see that we can also lock the layer and do everything in between. We can select everything in that layer. If you magically click on an invisible box, I know it always weirds student out when I say, yeah, click over here, and you're like, click on what? I'm like, I know, right? There's nothing there. But if you click there, it'll click on everything that is in that layer, which again is extremely helpful. Now, I don't really need the bounding box, so in my case, I'm just gonna delete that and turn that layer off. In my case, the next one is these guys, and they're pretty wild. So I'm going to double click on those. I could change their fonts and things like that. For the sake of tutorial and speed, I'm just going to make them a little bit smaller. Honestly, I'm not sure why they came out so big. Probably has something to do with the font. But hey, that's how you got to learn. We only need one crisper right there. And again, kind of just to get those out of the way. I should be able to actually click on them like any other text, yep, and change their size accordingly. I can hold shift and really, I don't know why it always puts in Pig Latin, but it does. Kind of part of the new illustrators. Let's take that one and I'll hold shift so I can make that look a lot cooler. Now obviously we don't want magenta, that would be silly. So I'm going to click on everything in that layer. I'm going to double click on this guy right here. And I'm going to change it to something a little bit more grayscale. Now something that I like to go over, especially in my graphics courses, you should never use the true color black. There's nothing wrong with it, it's just too demanding, it's too visually demanding, and for the sake of a printer, it's actually really dark purple, right? And it just doesn't look good. It usually is, again, too visually demanding. And you'll kind of notice, actually, some of the great computer graphics works out there, it is a pretty universal rule. We don't use true black, but we use sort of an off black, again, to mimic the graphic styles that we would use analog, right? You know, when you crochet something, is it true black with that graphite? No, it's kind of like shiny, it's kind of gray. So again, when in doubt, you're trying to mimic what we would do regularly in drafting. So again, something a little off black, and that's starting to look pretty good. Now it doesn't look like I got all my lines, because it looks like maybe I have some construction lines in there. I don't know. Didn't even grab, oh, because I only got the poche part. There actually is still a part that is magenta. So you'll see that one part controls the poche and one controls the stroke, right? The fill and the stroke. If I double click on that part, I can make a very light line. And as you can see, if we zoom in a little bit, a lot of it, whole lot of it, we can really start to tell the difference between these lines. And I can even give it an outline. That's probably not what I want to do. Again, it looks very digital. It looks unhuman because, well, let's face it, if you try to do that as a human, you would die, right? That would be insane. Unless you get those special little pens that actually make a little, outline around them. Anyway, we kind of want to get rid of that. Obviously, we don't want to put also a line on there, so I'm going to remove the line with that remove tool, right? So in my case, it'll be done. Yes, it has a shortcut, but not necessary. But again, we're already starting to see some really nice line weights here, both dark and, again, not true black, but it really is kind of this nice off black with something that actually resembles a graphite line pretty well, and will print pretty well also. Another thing that we can do is change the stroke. So if we click on these little line weight, it literally looks like line weight, right? We can change the weight of the line. Now, the smallest line that you can make on a printer is a 0.125. That would definitely be something to write down. And as you can see, it's pretty small, right? Arguably, if I wanted to make it look even smaller, I could lighten it. And to be fair, that probably just won't even print, but it looks pretty good on the computer. And as soon as we zoom out, as you can see, it varies whether we can see it or not. Another thing that is pretty nice about Illustrator is I can go to View, and I can look at the actual size of something. I'm pretty sure. Hopefully it hasn't moved. Where's it at? Keep going. There it is. Yeah. So that's pretty nice. Even though I find that sometimes it's off, and let's face it, with two projectors, it's like, okay, well, which one is it, right? Again, it can be helpful on your screen. It just depends what kind of resolution you have on your computer. But more likely than not, especially if you have a Mac, it's a true size. So that ends up being pretty helpful. But as you can see, that's going to be a pretty hard line to see, right? So definitely test this with this exercise a little bit. See what you can print, see what you cannot print, right? I would say, for the sake of this exercise, please, if you use any color, only use one color. You're only allowed one accent color. In fact, I used to have this professor that had us at the beginning of the year pick a accent color. Mine was cyan, and he was always making fun of me because he couldn't read my text, right? So I'd often fill my text with cyan, but then actually put a layer on the outside of it so that he could actually see the text. Anyway, not a part of our assignment. However, if you'd like to pick an accent color, please do. Next, let's go ahead and turn that off. I want to look at the poche, and really any layer that is in the poche, right? Because we do have a couple of those. So I just want to select everything in there. I'm going to go ahead and change it all to one thing, but as you can see, it's changing probably more than I want it to, right? It's changing the poche lines a little bit more. So I might want to actually do that one at a time. However, I don't want to select anything in Illustrator. So I'm going to select something I know. I'm going to go to Select, Same, Appearance. And it's going to select the same stuff for me. That way I don't really have to think about it. So I don't want to change the fill. In my case, I do want to change the line. And as you can see, it doesn't really explode those lines. So we might actually have to click on it and go to our properties. Usually all the way at the bottom there is ungroup in your properties. So if you hit ungroup, be very careful because now they're all very separate lines. Usually. Oh, release. And as you can see, there are many lines to that. Now what's nice is they're all in the same layer, so we shouldn't have a problem selecting them. right? In my case, I want to ungroup and release those. And just to make sure, release. And now they're all separated lines. Now they're stuck in those angles, by the way, now. Sorry, you can't really see it in the projector so well. But we'll take one of those lines. Again, I don't want to sit there and select every line. So I'm going to go to the same appearance. Again, select same appearance. Now I can change the line weight, right? So we'll choose something a little bit more like that. I can mess around with things to kind of see what's going on there. Obviously, it's not a fill situation. Oh, okay, now we're getting somewhere. Let's try that again. So again, I'm not going to select everything. Select same appearance. And maybe I change the weight of those, right? After all, they're at 1 point. That is probably the max line usually I ever use, is probably about 1.5. Arguably, it can change upon drawing. I can be really dramatic and you can go 5 points, but be sparingly, because at the end of the day, you want to look human, not unhuman. So let's go with 0.45. That's looking pretty sweet. And let's go a little bit lighter there. Not too shabby. However, that's looking pretty dark. Again, I don't want to select every single one. I might have thousands of these. I mean, after all, this is just a simple drawing. And of course, these drawings get much more complex. I'll select the same appearance of those pieces, right? Now in my case, I accidentally got the other ones. So I might need to ungroup them or just select them for the sake of time. We'll change that fill. Again, something a little bit more nice. That's actually looking pretty good. Sweet. Wow, that's even without any line weight. It actually looks pretty architectural, if you ask me. Right? There's sort of the white, and there's sort of this implied line effect to it, which is pretty nice. We'll go back to layer, and we can start stacking these layers if you wanted to, and start seeing how it's starting to come out. Not too shabby, right? We're definitely getting somewhere. And I've barely had to click on anything. If I didn't talk so much, I would have already been done. Let's go ahead and go with the large line. I'm going to select all my large lines. Obviously, I don't want them to be red. We'll go with something a little bit more dark and a little bit more weighted. Let's get fancy. Let's go with 1.2, because I can. We'll get some medium lines in there. Sweet. We'll select all of our medium lines. Obviously, I want it to be medium compared to what I just did, so definitely not green, and a little bit more medium-like. You'll see that I kind of just wing it in terms of the grayscale here, and eventually you get pretty good at this. Of what you see on your screen is about what you print. To be fair, you don't ever get exactly what you see on the screen. And very often you have to make something on the screen much lighter. You'll notice that I went from black to almost like a very light gray, because I know it's going to print a little bit darker always, right? So let's take that piece. That's looking pretty good. Maybe a little bit thicker than that. After all, it is a medium line, so 0.79. It's about the same of what it was, but that's okay. Take my outline. Sweet. That should probably be my thickest line. Again, double click. We'll go with dark on that one, and we'll go thick. So I don't know. Feeling spicy. We'll go with 2.0. Now we're starting to get somewhere. Starting to look at least a little bit of an architectural drawing. And it even has some of those airs, right? That of course make it a little human. And I could take it a step further. I could hold shift. And don't get me wrong, I can get kind of fancy with the spices. Nobody's ever gonna see that. However, if I was afraid they were, I could always arrange it and send it to the back, or way back. Obviously, it's because it's in the lines. So maybe I put all of these at the top. There we go. You guys see what it did there? The layer on top is the layer on the top, whereas the layer at the bottom is the layer at the bottom. But as you can see, we're starting to get somewhere. Definitely not bad. But again, what's nice is my studio professor, say Professor Lorette, comes around and goes, dude, your shade and shadow is too gray, it's too dark. Can you lighten that up for me? Certainly, Professor. Oh, there's my poche, right? I can select all of those, and I could even make them lighter just all together. Ah, okay. Thank you. What an easy change. Can you imagine that in any other scenario? If it was an analog drawing, guess what you'd have to do? Start over or get erasing, right? Now, obviously, this is a tool for time, right? It definitely saves us a lot of time, arguably once we get really good at it. In the beginning stages, usually it takes the most time, right? So don't get me wrong, you will get frustrated. You should have problems, and let's face it, you're going to learn more in those problems and mistakes than you will just sort of naturally getting it, right? Now, don't get me wrong, if you've already kind of done something like this in 2D, by all means, please try to model it. And if you do have some special questions of how to get it actually into a military projection, which is normally what it's called in Rhino, again, why it's advanced and we're sticking to just drawing two-dimensionally, is because it is something that I tend to talk about actually in computer graphics. However, for the sake of today, with 30 minutes to spare, that concludes the first exercise. Right, so drawing it, just a review, drawing it, ow, God, that hurt, right in the kneecap. So just to make sure we're clear, 3 drawings, right, 3 different shapes, and shade and shadow is a bonus, right? Again, it should be something pretty easy compared to what you know now, and you have the ability to O-snap and things like that. However, only asking for 3 of them, and they will be due at the beginning of next week. So Monday. However, keep in mind, tomorrow is a work day. You're more than welcome to use this studio and even our in-class studio on your own computer. I kind of fly around to each room and answer questions. On Thursday, we got a whole nother tutorial of this, and I will be recording it again. That one we will start talking about 3D modeling, right? Or at least it'll become an option, right? Because I'll go over it heavily. However, you could still draw in 2D. Again, some of you guys struggled a little bit in that 2-point perspective, probably because of the accuracy, probably because it's just tedious. Whereas in this, you can zoom in as far as you like. And you could really see this stuff. I don't know about you, but that would take a magnifying glass in the analog world. Something like this, a guy like myself who can't see very well, the digital realm is where I thrive, because now I can be just as accurate as the guy who can see pretty well analog. Does that make sense, guys? So mess around with this. I really want to see some messy digital drawings. Obviously, we'll pin it up first thing next Monday to talk about it and talk about line weights. But obviously, this conversation will continue on as we get into the observation camera. If I am correct, this is our last exercise as well. I know, too. You're tired of them already. But things are starting to wind down, and I know things are going to start pumping up in studio, so it makes a lot more sense to take it slow, right? Especially for some of you guys that it looks like maybe this is your first time using Rhino, Illustrator, and the computer and architecture really in general. So, no questions? Comments? Concerns? Fair enough? Yes, ma'am. On Thursday. So yes, do your due diligence for studio. I'd imagine that's going to rev up pretty quickly. And obviously work on this in the background. Honestly, as you guys saw, if you weren't talking so much, it can be knocked out arguably a lot faster than analog. Right? And to be fair, we can go into Illustrator, we could save 8 types of line weights that we were using, or accent colors. You can get really fancy with the spices here. I'm always appreciative of creativity on the exercises, right? After all, I really want to see you start pushing your limits, getting out of your comfort zone, things like that. Good questions. Any others? Fair enough. Let's end the recording for today. Pray to the Lord that it was recording.